back there. Good to see you, Matt. I'm glad you're home for a few days here. Rick comes home Tuesday, and that'll be exciting. So, a little bit of a homecoming here. Exodus chapter 2. Now, here we are. We started this series on Exodus, and Exodus means to depart. The Hebrews, the children of Israel, the descendants of Israel, they've been in slavery, they've multiplied, and God's going to lead them out of Egypt to the land that he had promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So the book is about deliverance, and we're going to see that a lot in the first 18 chapters. Last week we looked at chapter 1, and chapter 1 was about living by faith. You had those midwives who had to make a choice. Do I obey the government, Pharaoh, and put to death the Hebrew babies, the boys? Or do I fear God and obey God? Well, that was an easy decision for them. They feared God more than they feared Pharaoh. God blessed them. And so there's some lessons there for all of us. Living by faith, we need to live by biblical principles and hold on to those things no matter how much pressure comes our way. And then chapter 2, we're introduced to Moses, and the same principle applies. You have to live by faith, or in this case, you have to lead by faith. And you see it dramatically in the story of Moses here. And so there's this interesting verse right in the middle of the chapter. Look at chapter 2, verse 15. Now, when Pharaoh heard this thing, heard what? The murder of the Egyptian by Moses, he sought to slay Moses. But Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. And I think there's some lessons we can learn by sitting next to a well, slowing down, doing some soul searching, doing some thinking, asking ourselves some of the harder questions of life. And Moses, I'm going to put Moses in that category of people in the Bible who are a little bit on the impulsive side. Peter's in this group. I like what a friend said about Peter. Peter usually entered a room mouth first, right? He just everywhere all at once. And Moses has this tendency to impulsivity coupled with temper and anger. And we'll see it a couple of times through Scripture here. So we're going to be looking at the life of Moses and trying to find out some answers to the question by looking at his life. What can we learn by sitting next to a well? I want to do two things, though. I want to get a 2-for-1 shot in here. Right? Having been able to teach history here in our school, I do like my students reading biographies, and when we work our way through a chapter, noting men and women who've accomplished some really great things or some infamous things. And so I could tell them to memorize all these facts about a certain individual, and that's good, all right? But I'd rather equip them so they could do that for themselves. And so I usually have them look for these things. Tell me about the time in which that person lived. Not just his birthday and when he passed away, but what was going on in the world at that time. And then family. Family has a huge impact on shaping us. And certainly we see that in the life of Moses. Then their education, both formal and informal education. And then the bulk of it, were their accomplishments? What sort of adversities? And I like adversities, but we could also call that, in the case of Moses, chapter 2, some of his failures. And then the great thing about studying Christians is what the Lord does in their life. And that's the key here, because in John chapter 15, Jesus Christ said, I'm the vine, you are the branches. Without me, or apart from me, you cannot do anything. And Moses has to learn that lesson. And I think that's one of the lessons that he has to learn here, that without the Lord, nothing. No matter how talented and gifted you are. So let's look at the passage here, all right? Now, chapter 1, we know what the situation was, the time. The descendants of Israel have entered into the land of Goshen, and over this 400-year period, they've multiplied, and they probably number close to 200 people. And then Pharaoh, developing a foreign policy and domestic policy realizes we can't have these non-Egyptians here in the country. They'll get more than us. They'll take over the country. And so they're going to have a ban on all the Hebrews, all right? Nobody immigrating in, all right? And let's put them to work as slaves and keep them in such oppressive condition that they don't have time to rebel against us. That's when Moses is born. So chapter 2, verse 1, we learn a little bit about Moses' family. Verse 1 says, "And there went out a man of the house of Levi and took to wife a daughter of Levi." You know, it's not the best time to get married when Pharaoh is putting to death the children, the boys that might be born. And yet, by faith, Moses' parents feared God more than they feared Pharaoh, and they raised him. And so chapter 2, verse 1, even though it's a terrible time to get married and start a family, this man did. By the way, that old saying, two can live as cheaply as one, have you ever heard that before? That's true, but it's only for half as long because it's a math problem, okay? Chapter 2, verse 2, "And the woman conceived and bare a son. When she saw him that he was a goodly child, she hid him 3 months." She disobeyed Pharaoh. Verse 3, "When she could no longer hide him, she took for him an ark of bulrushes, and daubed it with slime and with pitch, and put the child therein, and she laid it in the flags by the river's brink. And his sister stood afar off to wit what would be done to him." Couldn't hide this baby anymore. Everybody probably in the neighborhood probably knew she had this baby and that it was a boy. And instead of killing this child and throwing it in the river, they make a little ark, a little boat out of bulrushes, and then hide it in the reeds there at the river. I sure would love to know more. All right. Did Moses' mom know that Pharaoh's daughter, that was her favorite spot? All right. I kind of think she did. The faith that she must have had, the love that she must have had for this child, to have nursed it, brought it into this world, not killed it, put it in that little boat, put it in the river, not knowing what would happen. Yet Hebrews chapter 11 is pretty clear. Moses' parents, by faith, did this. Moses had faith. He gets commended in chapter 11 of Hebrews, but so did his parents. So, wow, when you come to talk about his family, you see this great faith, and you see, I think, this proper fear of God, more so than Pharaoh, and they're just going to trust God, and they have no idea what's going to happen. Verse 5, "And the daughter of Pharaoh came down to wash herself at the river, and her maidens walked along by the riverside, and when she saw the ark among the flags, she sent her maid to fetch it. And when she had opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the babe wept. And she had compassion on him and said, 'This is one of the Hebrews' children.'" It was obvious. This is one of theirs, all right? That moment must have been something incredible. Open up that little basket thinking you found something really cool, and you did, a little baby boy. And then he starts crying, and that motherly instinct kicks in. She picks up that child and tries to comfort it, and instantly some sort of bond. Got a little bit of a taste of this. Back in May, it was a pretty rough day at school. No traction. I tried to like crazy to get stuff done. Interrupted. Oh, nothing. Everything, instead of turning to gold, was turning to straw that I put my hand to that day. It was not a fun day. And then Julie had walked my little grandson up here. What would he have been, 3, 4 months old? Brought him into my office. It's a great day in the neighborhood, I tell you, all right? Well, something akin to that. And you guys have done that. I've seen you snatch these little babies, all right, and hold them. And you want all that love that goes, well, that's Pharaoh's daughter. So Moses had this great family, all right, mother, father that loved and feared God. But he's also going to get a foster parent. And God saw to it that it just wasn't anybody, but it was Pharaoh's daughter. Look at verse 6. When she had opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the babe wept. And she had compassion on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." Then said his sister to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call to thee a nurse of the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for thee?" I just love this. Is hilarious, right? She's watching. She sees it. This is one of the Hebrew babies. Oh, excuse me. All right. Would you like me to go get a nurse from the Hebrew? I happen to know one. All right. That's nursing, right? I'll get you one. And he said, "Yeah, go get a nurse for it." And there must have been conversations. There must have been visits. There must have been just a connection. And not only does Moses' mother get her son longer, she gets paid for it. Whoa, what a deal. You get paid for taking care of your children, all right? But there had to come a place later on where that child had to be weaned, and then that child had to be given to Pharaoh's daughter. This is the second time mom has had to say goodbye to that child. Whoa. There's a great deal of love from his parents, and I believe from his foster parents. And now he's going to be raised in the palace. Look at verse 10. And the child grew, and she brought him unto Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And she called his name Moses. And she said, "Because I drew him out of the water." And that's what we know about his childhood, right? Up to the point of being weaned. And then in verse 11, he's a full-grown man. There's a historian, Josephus, who wrote in the 1st century, and he's like the father of modern history writers, okay? You can't trust everything he says. You know, the problem with history writers back in the ancient days is they worked for the king. And if the king didn't like your record of history, well, it didn't get published, all right, or worse. But we do get a few clues about that period of time, the 1st century. And of course, this is much earlier than that. And so traditions, according to Josephus, says that Moses actually would be a commanding general in the Egyptian army, the southern army. That's what everybody thought in the 1st century. So we're talking from 2 or 3 years old now. Now he's a man. And everything that we have to figure out in between is kind of speculation. But you guys know enough history. What sort of things would the adopted son of Pharaoh's daughter learn by living in the palace? Todd? He would have learned the Egyptian language. What would he have learned? Best schools of Egypt, all right? What would he have learned? Brother Taylor? He would have learned all about their gods, all right? I think he would have learned a lot of protocol, how to conduct yourself, especially conducting yourself in the palace and among world leaders and being able to watch that. History, science, reading and writing, both the hieroglyphics and then the shorter version of it, and then some Canaanite languages as well. We're talking someone here with a great deal of the knowledge of the day. Here's God that's trying to raise a leader to deliver the descendants of Israel. He's going to need some things. Moses doesn't know it at the time, all right? Moses' parents don't know it at the time, but they do know he's a goodly child. There's something God has in store for this child. And God begins to put in his life some of the things that he's going to need later on. When we look at this big picture of deliverance, remember we talked, you need a leader, but a leader by himself can't get the job done. He needs the Lord. We'll see that in chapter 3. They're going to need liberty, freedom, and then they're going to be given a law. And the order there is important, all right, because the law is not going to make you free. And then they're actually going to finally end up in the land. Leader, Lord, liberty, law, land. Keep it straight there for us. All right? So there's some things that Moses is going to have to learn about leadership. Now there's some conjecturing we have to do. Verse 11, and I think that's okay as long as we tell ourselves we're not making this Bible here. But it says, "It came to pass in those days when Moses was grown that he went out unto his brethren, and he looked on their burdens." So here's this child that's raised in the palace, but he knows he's not Egyptian. He's Hebrew. And he comes to the place where he wants to get connected with his roots. Now, has that been going on the whole time? I don't know. Visiting his mom? Visiting his brother and sister? His dad? Maybe. All right? But I do know that it came to a point in his life where he says, I'm not Egyptian. I am Hebrew. Those aren't necessarily my gods. All right? I have my people. And he doesn't know a lot about God, by the way. All right? We'll find that out later on next week or the week after in chapter 3. That whole burning bush. Moses has to ask, when I go and tell them, all right, who do I tell them sent me? So he doesn't know the Lord by name, right? But there's this overwhelming desire. Something's got to be done. These are my people. Look what's happening to my brethren. And now we see that impulsivity. Look at verse 11 again. When Moses was grown, that he went out unto his brethren and looked on their burdens, and he spied an Egyptian smiting a Hebrew, one of his brethren. And he looked this way and that way. And when he saw that there was no man, he slew the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. Whoa. Here's this Egyptian, all right, abusing, beating a Hebrew. These are my people. He looks this way. He looks that way. And he kills them. Moses is a murderer. Ooh. He's going to be, he's Moses in the Hebrew faith. This is like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Moses is up there, all right? And he buries him in the sand. I find the next verse remarkable. Verse 13. And when he went out the second day, he's not done. Behold, 2 men of the Hebrews strove together. And he said to him that did the wrong, Wherefore smitest thou thy fellow? And he said, Who made thee a prince and a judge over us? Your children would say, Who made you the boss of us? All right? And he said, Who made thee a prince and a judge over us? Intendest thou to kill me as thou killed the Egyptian? And Moses feared and said, Surely this thing is known. I want to know who told them. He looked this way. He looked that way. There's no one around. He killed the Egyptian. And then the next day, everybody knows about it. Who told them? Yeah, he delivered this Hebrew from getting abused, beaten. You think the guy would be glad and keep his mouth closed, right? He witnessed a murder. He's an accessory to the crime, okay? But this guy goes, you should have seen it, this Egyptian, all right? You know that Moses guy? He came and he delivered me, all right? And the next day he tries to act as a prince and as a judge, as a deliverer. And they don't want it. Boy, that must have been tough. 2 or 3-year-old, now the palace. Oh, I'm Hebrew, I'm not Egyptian. I want to identify with my people, and my people don't want me. Whew. Talk about accomplishments? No, not yet. He tries to do it in his own strength, and it's a complete failure. And then Pharaoh finds out about it. And Pharaoh wants to kill him. What does that tell you about their relationship to begin with? You probably didn't think a lot about Moses growing up here in the palace. I don't know if this is Pharaoh's, the daughter of Pharaoh, or the next generation of Pharaoh. The Bible doesn't let us know that. But I never did like that Moses guy, all right? And there's my opportunity, all right? Because really, since when being a king or in the family kept them from killing people? They do it all the time and don't get in trouble. It's not that high sense of justice. So there's a lot of intrigue going on in here. So look at verse 14. And he said, "Who made thee a prince and a judge over us? Intendest thou to kill me as thou killed the Egyptian?" And Moses feared and said, "Surely this thing is known." Now when Pharaoh heard this thing, he sought to slay Moses, but Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. I just love this mental picture here, because in life, sometimes we just got to sit. That's hard, right? Because we want to do stuff, we want to accomplish stuff, we want to get it done, we want to fix that problem, and we want to solve it, and we want to build, and that's our nature as men, right? And yet God says, "No, Moses, you need a little break." And so for the next 40 years, Moses is going to sit by a well. No, it's the whole time. It's metaphorical here, all right? But there's some things he's got to learn. Moses, I know that you want to deliver the Hebrew people, but you can't do it in your own strength. Without the Lord, nothing. And the Lord's missing in his life. When we read the next verse there, verse 16, "Now the priests of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock, and the shepherds came and drove them away. But Moses stood up and helped them." And get this, he didn't kill anybody, all right? But what did he do? He stood up. He took a stand. Here are shepherds picking on these 7 young ladies. And he defends them. And he does it, I think, the right way. So Moses is starting to learn some of these lessons there. So let's ask ourselves this question. What sort of things is Moses going to need to learn before he's at the place where God can use him to deliver the children of Israel? You know the story of Moses, so what are you thinking? Todd, you got something there? Faith has got to be in the Lord. Medina? Obey. Right. Patience. Yeah, patience. All right. How many of you are patient by nature? I'm just curious. Anybody, you've got that thing nailed? Yeah, okay, patience. Really? I would rather drive 3 miles out of my way as long as I'm making progress than to wait the same amount of time in traffic. All right? Patience. You're remarkable. Patience. What else do you think he needs to learn? Hey, John? Oh, humility. Yeah. Ooh, I think this might be the one. All right? Humility. Don't you know who I am? I'm Moses. Right? You two guys stop fighting. Right? I wonder if he tried to say something to the Egyptian who was smiting. Hey, I'm Pharaoh's daughter. Stop beating that Hebrew. I wonder if he said anything there. Oh, I remember my friend told me this. He was at Walmart, and the lines were really long, and there was this guy that was fussing, and just fussing, and finally got up to the cashier, and just let her have it. Don't you know who I am? She looked at him and pulled the microphone over and said, "Attention shoppers, there's a man in line 5 who doesn't know who he is. Can anybody help him?" I think Moses had that pride thing going on. Yeah, I think humility. Boy, there's a world of difference between being the son of Pharaoh's daughter and a shepherd. Oh, and I just thought of this. What do Egyptians think of shepherds anyway? Yeah, exactly. One more, Todd. in no society because there's nobody around. Right. Look at verse 23. Oh, Brother Taylor? Oh, yeah, he's a vagrant. Yeah, I didn't even think of that. He doesn't even have a job, a place to live. All right, here we go. Verse 23. And it came to pass in the process of time. There's that patience element. God has a timetable, right? According to God's timing, not ours. And it came to pass in the process of time that the king of Egypt died, and the children of Israel sighed by reason of the bondage. And they cried, and their cry came up unto God by reason of the bondage. And God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. Not that God forgot, all right, but everything God's timing now. And God looked upon the children of Israel, and God had respect unto them. That word respect, great Hebrew word, means to gaze intently upon. He saw it. He saw the pain. He saw the suffering. He saw the hardship. He saw the years of turmoil. And he saw his covenant, his promise that he had made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He saw that, okay, now. And I think that includes Moses. Moses is ready now. Everything according to God's timing. Verse 1 of chapter 3. And now Moses kept the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, a priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the backside of the desert and came to the mountain of God, even to Horeb. And the angel of the Lord appeared unto him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush burned with fire, and the bush was not consumed. And Moses said, I will now turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush is not burnt. And when the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called unto him out of the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here am I. And he said, Draw not nigh hither, put off thy shoes from off thy feet, for the place wherein thou standest is holy ground. Moreover, he said, I am the God of thy father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look upon God. Moses is going to be introduced to the Lord here. Hey, just a couple of quick observations. This meeting of Moses with the Lord. What stands out in your mind? Todd? All right, he had the right response here. A fear of God. I hadn't thought of that, but that's one of those lessons I think he needed to learn, that God has a plan. His plan isn't always my plan, and his timetable isn't my timetable. And there are certain things that have got to happen, and God's working his plan. Great. Brother Taylor? Oh, yeah. God knows what to use to get our attention, and for all of us, it's different, all right? Yeah, that'll preach, okay? Army? Yeah, and that's going to be one of the things he learns, right? He's going to learn about the one true God here, right? And all those things he was taught. I don't think I believe he bought into them, but he'd heard it all. And God is yeah, it could have been Egypt, but here on the backside of the desert, and God knew where he needed to get a hold of his attention. Hey, we're out of time, all right? So we hate to end right here, okay? But I also hate for all those people to walk in while I'm trying to teach, okay? So let me just pray, and then a couple of quick announcements. And next week we'll tie into this as Moses learns about God and God's plan for his life. Lord, I do want to thank you. And Lord, I pray that like Moses, that maybe we'd slow down a little bit, especially during this holiday season, and to think about you, think about your plan for our life, think what we need next in our life. Lord, show us our dependency that we have on you. And Lord, I pray that as we look through the lessons that Moses learns, that you will also teach us what we need. And we'll give you all the praise for Jesus' sake. Amen. Okay, several announcements. Next Sunday afternoon, 3:30, we have the Ann Pearl Nursing Home Ministry. Next Friday, this coming Friday, Christmas party for our Sunday school class over at our house. We'd love to have you. 6:30 to 9 o'clock each or so. There's a sign-up list on the back bulletin board. That would help us to know how to plan some things. So if you know for sure that you're coming, put your name up there. You don't put your name up there this morning, you can't come. No. You can still come, all right, because I know schedules change and things like that. But that'll get us started on the planning, and we'd love to have you come over to the house. And seems like there should be something else. Sign-up list. Okay. Ask me later. All right. All right, you're dismissed. We'll see you in church in a few minutes.